I am Jamie Carter, 35 years old, a wildlife specialist working at Outpost 23, a military base deep in the wilderness of Alaska. My work primarily revolves around analyzing the activities of animals in the area and ensuring they don't pose a threat to the base. It's a challenging job, but I've always loved it, until the day everything changed because of a mother bear. That day, it was a freezing morning, with temperatures below freezing, and I was reviewing data from the motion sensors around the base. Suddenly, the alarm system blared loudly. A roar echoed right after, followed by heavy footsteps crushing the snow. I ran outside with a group of soldiers and couldn't believe my eyes. A massive brown bear was breaking through the electric fence, heading straight for the base. The soldiers immediately raised their guns, their eyes filled with tension. "Hold your positions," I shouted, trying to calm them down. But what surprised me was the bear didn't appear aggressive. It stopped in the middle of the yard, lowered its head, and made small sounds that resembled cries for help. Its fur was soaked with ice and snow, and it was even trembling. "Jamie, we can't take any chances," Lieutenant Parker, the base commander, shouted loudly. He ordered the soldiers to hold their positions and be ready to fire if necessary. I stepped forward, standing between them and the bear. "Wait, look at it. It doesn't seem like it wants to attack." I tried to keep my voice calm but firm. Parker stared at me, but signaled the team to lower their weapons. I moved closer, careful not to startle the bear. It looked at me with deep, imploring eyes. I noticed that its front paw was scratched, likely from the electric fence. "It's injured," I said, kneeling down to get a better look. But just then, the bear suddenly let out a roar. A soldier flinched, his finger tightening on the trigger, but I shouted, "Stop!" The bullet never left the chamber, but the moment left everyone tense and on edge. The bear lowered itself, bowing its head to the snow, and made strange sounds. It wasn't growling, it was like it was trying to say something. I had never seen anything like it before. "Jamie, are you sure? It's still a wild animal." Parker stepped forward, his face full of doubt. I replied, "This isn't instinct. It needs us." Parker looked like he wanted to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "This is our opportunity, Parker. If it came to humans, there must be a reason." I spoke with all the conviction I could muster, my eyes never leaving the bear. Once again, I knelt down and signaled for the soldiers to keep their distance. The bear lifted its paw, revealing a small but minor wound. Yet its behavior, the roaring, bowing, the faint whimpers, pointed to one thing. It needed help. "It's a mother bear," I whispered, recognizing it immediately. "She has cubs." Parker frowned. "Then where are her cubs?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. If they were still alive, they were out there somewhere, and time was running out. Parker stood there, staring at the mother bear as if trying to make sense of the situation. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm before offering my explanation. "Look at its tracks," I said, pointing to the distinct imprints on the snow. "It's traveled a long way. Its paw is scratched. Its fur is covered in snow and ice. It didn't come here to hunt or attack, Parker. It came here for help." Parker hesitated, his gaze flicking between the bear and me. "Then why didn't it bring its cubs? And why did it break through our fence? I can't prioritize this unless I have a solid reason." His voice was cold, but I sensed a slight wavering in his resolve. "That's what we need to figure out. But one thing I'm sure of," I said, turning back to the bear. It still sat there, its head bowed, letting out small whimpers as if it were running out of patience. "If it hasn't found its cubs, they might be trapped or in danger somewhere. And if we don't act now, it'll be too late to save them." I stepped closer, crouching down to examine the tracks. The deep imprints in the snow indicated that the mother bear had wandered around the area extensively before deciding to break through the fence. I looked back at Parker. "Look at these tracks. It's been circling the base all night, watching us. It didn't act impulsively. It knows we can help." Parker frowned, as if weighing my words. But just as he opened his mouth, a signal came through from the command center. A cold, detached voice echoed from the loudspeaker. "Lieutenant Parker, this is the regional command. We've been informed of the situation at the base. You are to maintain security and stay within the perimeter under any circumstances. Understood?" I could see the tension in Parker's eyes as he turned to face me. "That's an order, Jamie. I can't ignore it." A surge of anger rose in my chest. Parker, this isn't about security or military protocols. This is about the life of a creature and her cubs. We can't just stand here and do nothing. I stepped closer, my gaze unwavering. Parker silently stared at me for a few seconds. I could tell he was struggling internally. Finally, he sighed. You're staking your reputation on this, Jamie. If I agree, I'll be held accountable to the command. I understand, I replied without hesitation. But we both know that doing the right thing doesn't always align with military procedures. Parker reluctantly nodded, then ordered the team to prepare. I quickly returned to the tracks, trying to piece together the story they told. The trail led toward the forest's edge, through icy and rugged terrain. But something troubling caught my eye. There was a jagged mark mixed with the paw prints, as if something or someone had been pursuing the bear. We need to move quickly, I said, glancing at Parker. If a predator is following, the cubs don't have much time. He nodded and directed his team. We're heading out immediately. Jamie, you lead the way. I said nothing, grabbing my gear and preparing for the journey. When I turned back, the mother bear had risen to her feet, staring at us with determined eyes. She turned and began walking, leading the way as if she understood we were ready to help. I followed her, feeling a strong sense of urgency in my heart. This wasn't just about saving the cubs. It was a testament to the fragile yet powerful bond that still exists between humans and nature. I took a deep breath, tightened the straps on my backpack, and stepped forward. A dangerous journey awaited us. We began the journey following the mother bear, trudging through the thick snow in the dim light of the Alaskan morning. The icy wind bit into our faces, so cold I could feel every breath freeze in the air. The mother bear led the way, moving slowly but steadily. Her deep paw prints in the snow carved out a path for us to follow. Our team consisted of 4 people: me, Parker, Carlos, and Rachel. Each of us carried a backpack filled with medical supplies, ropes, and some food. However, the tension in the air weighed heavier than anything in our packs. Jamie, are you sure about this? We could be out here all day and find nothing, Carlos grumbled. He hadn't agreed with this plan from the start. It's not about finding nothing, I replied without turning around. We're searching for a chance to save lives. If you can't understand that, then don't say anything. I heard Rachel clear her throat softly, as if trying to ease the tension. Parker remained silent, his eyes fixed on the mother bear's every move. A snowstorm hit us without warning. The wind grew stronger, whipping thick snowflakes around us, making it nearly impossible to see ahead. Stop, Parker shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the wind. The group halted, looking around warily. The mother bear also stopped, turning back to look at us as if to say, keep going. But with visibility this poor, every step forward was a potential danger. We can't turn back, I said loudly, trying to keep my voice steady against the howling wind. If we stop now, her cubs won't survive the night. Parker nodded slowly, then signaled for the group to keep moving. I could see the tension etched on everyone's faces, but no one objected. The conditions worsened. The terrain grew more treacherous, with slippery patches of ice stretching across the path. I slipped once, grabbing onto a snow-covered rock for support. My hand scraped against its sharp edge, leaving a stinging cut, but I gritted my teeth and got back up without waiting for anyone to help. Rachel came closer. Jamie, are you okay? She asked. I nodded, not wanting to slow the group down. Keep moving, I said quickly, trying to hide the throbbing pain in my hand. The mother bear kept walking ahead, undeterred by the harsh weather. After nearly an hour of battling the snow and ice, the wind began to subside. That's better, Parker said, his voice filled with relief. But it wasn't long before another sign caught my attention. I knelt to examine a set of strange tracks nearby. They weren't from the mother bear or from us. Something's following us, I said quietly. It could be wolves. The group stopped, gripping their weapons tightly. Stay alert, but don't let it slow us down, Parker instructed. The mother bear led us into a dense forest where the snow was thicker and the towering trees blocked out much of the light. We had to tread carefully, our senses on high alert for any sound or movement around us. The air was heavy, and even our breathing seemed louder than usual. After 2 hours of slow progress, the mother bear suddenly stopped. She turned, letting out a soft sound as if urging us to stay close. When I stepped forward to see what was ahead, my heart sank. In front of us was an area where the snow had collapsed into a deep sinkhole. At its center was a large pit with overlapping bear tracks scattered around it. The mother bear approached the edge of the hole, letting out a short, sharp roar as though calling for her cubs. I knelt down and shone a flashlight into the pit. At the bottom, two bear cubs lay motionless. One barely moved, its fur matted with snow and ice reflecting the light. The other let out a faint whimper, so weak it was almost inaudible. "They're there," I said, my voice catching in my throat. Rachel stepped closer, taking a deep breath. "What do we do, Jamie?" she asked. I turned to Parker, but he didn't need further prompting. "Get the gear ready. We're getting them out," he said firmly. The mother bear stood nearby, her eyes never leaving her cubs. In her gaze, I saw desperation mixed with a fragile glimmer of hope. I clenched my injured hand, ignoring the sting, and took another deep breath. "We're going to save them," I said, feeling the weight of the responsibility on my shoulders. "There's no other option." Parker quickly directed the team to set up the rescue equipment. Carlos and Rachel secured ropes and pulleys around the edge of the pit, while I monitored the condition of the two cubs from above. The larger cub moved weakly, but the smaller one was nearly motionless, its fur trembling slightly in the wind. The mother bear stood a few meters away, her eyes locked on us, occasionally letting out soft whimpers as if to reassure her cubs. "Jamie, where do we start?" Parker asked, his tone sharp but cautious. I looked up, taking a deep breath. "We'll start with the larger one. It has enough strength to endure being lifted first, but we need to be extremely careful. The ground here is unstable." Carlos anchored the rope securely to a nearby tree, ensuring everything was firmly in place. Rachel double-checked the pulley system and began lowering the rope into the pit. "We don't have much time. If the temperature drops further, neither of them will make it," I reminded, keeping my eyes on the edge of the pit. Rachel lowered the rope slowly. As the pulley neared the larger cub, it stirred and let out a weak cry. The mother bear rose abruptly, growling softly, startling everyone. "Stay calm," I shouted, raising my hands to signal the bear that everything was fine. I held its gaze, steady and confident, until the bear gradually calmed down. "We need to keep it calm," Rachel said. "If it panics, this could get dangerous." I crouched down and spoke gently to the mother bear. "We're helping your cubs. Just a little longer." I wasn't sure if it understood me, but its gaze softened, and it lowered itself onto the snow, continuing to watch us intently. Lifting the larger cub wasn't easy. Each pull on the rope caused the ground around the pit's edge to crumble slightly. "Careful! Don't tug too hard," I shouted. Rachel and Carlos worked in perfect sync, inching the cub upward. Parker held the safety rope firmly, ensuring no mistakes were made. Bit by bit, the cub was lifted closer to safety. The tension was palpable, but the team moved methodically, every action precise and deliberate. After about 20 minutes, the larger cub was finally brought to the surface. It lay curled up, breathing weakly but still alive. The mother bear approached but stopped just in front of me, as if waiting for permission. I nodded gently, and she immediately bent down to check on her cub, letting out soft, tender sounds. "Now for the second one," Parker said, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, but as I looked down into the pit, my heart sank. The smaller cub showed almost no signs of life. "We have to hurry," I said, my voice trembling. "It doesn't have much time left." Rachel prepared the rope for a second attempt, but as the pulley system was being lowered, a loud noise echoed. A section of the pit's edge collapsed, sending a large amount of dirt and rocks tumbling to the bottom. "Careful! The ground is getting weaker," I shouted, but the incident had made the pulley system far more dangerous to use. "There's no other way. I have to go down there," I said firmly. Parker objected immediately. "Jamie, you can't. If the pit collapses completely, we won't be able to pull you back up." But I had no choice. "If I don't go down, it will die." "This is no time for hesitation, Parker." I quickly strapped on a safety harness and signaled Rachel and Carlos to hold the rope securely. Parker reluctantly nodded, his eyes full of worry. "Be careful," he said curtly. I took a deep breath and began lowering myself into the pit. The air at the bottom was so cold it felt like it could freeze me solid. The smaller cub lay motionless, its fur coated in snow and ice. I knelt beside it and quickly checked its condition. It was still breathing, but barely. Gently, I wrapped it in an emergency thermal blanket I had brought, ensuring it was as insulated as possible. Then I signaled the team above to start pulling us up. As soon as the cub and I were lifted off the ground, I heard a loud crack. "Hurry up!" I shouted. The earth and rocks began collapsing around me, and I felt the rope shaking as Rachel and Carlos pulled faster. The mother bear roared loudly, pacing around the edge of the pit but not approaching, as if she understood she couldn't interfere. Seconds later, I was pulled over the edge, clutching the cub tightly in my arms. The moment I hit solid ground, I rolled away from the pit's edge, and the entire hole caved in, collapsing into a chaotic heap of dirt and rubble. I lay on my back in the snow, gasping for air, my heart pounding erratically. The mother bear rushed over immediately, but this time she didn't stop in front of me. She bent down, gently touching the small cub in my arms. Slowly, I placed the cub on the ground, and the mother bear quickly began checking both her cubs. Parker approached and helped me to my feet. "You just gambled your life," he said, his voice a mix of anger and concern. "It was necessary," I replied shortly, my eyes fixed on the mother bear. She stayed there, encircling her cubs with her thick fur, letting out soft, soothing sounds as if to lull them to sleep. But the fight wasn't over yet. The cubs were still weak, and I knew we'd have to do more to keep them alive. "We need to get them warm immediately," I said firmly. "Start preparing now." We quickly moved the two bear cubs to a temporary shelter made from thermal blankets and portable heat lamps. The cold wind continued to howl outside, but the space was warm enough to give the cubs a fighting chance. The mother bear followed closely, standing nearby, her eyes never leaving us. She wasn't aggressive or uneasy, just worried and waiting. I knelt beside the smaller cub, placing my hand on its icy body. "Its breathing is very weak," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Rachel handed me another thick blanket, and I wrapped it around the shivering cub. "We need to raise its body temperature immediately," I continued urgently. Parker crouched beside me, his face tense with concern. "Does it have a chance?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, instead checking the cub's heartbeat. "It does, but not much. We have to act fast." Rachel and Carlos started a small fire nearby, using a field heater to maintain a stable temperature. Parker and I worked on the smaller cub, while Rachel focused on the larger one. The larger cub seemed to be recovering slightly, moving gently and attempting to lift its head when the mother bear let out soft calls. "At least there's some hope," Rachel said, her voice more optimistic. The smaller cub, however, was still critical. After about 15 minutes, its breathing suddenly stopped. My heart sank as if into a bottomless pit. "No," I shouted, placing my hand on its chest to feel for a heartbeat. "We can't lose it." I began gently massaging its chest, applying the resuscitation techniques I had been trained to use. The mother bear let out a loud, distressed whimper and stepped closer, but Parker raised his hand to keep her at a safe distance. "Jamie, it's too weak," Carlos said, his voice trembling. "Let me do my job," I shot back, almost yelling. I wasn't sure how long I worked on the cub, but finally it let out a faint, shaky breath. Relief washed over me like a wave. "It's back," I said softly, almost in disbelief. The team exhaled collectively, and the mother bear moved closer, settling herself near her cubs. Her gaze stayed fixed on the smaller cub, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and maternal instinct. We took turns keeping the two cubs warm over the next several hours. Rachel used warm water bags placed near their bodies, while I continued checking their heartbeats and breathing. The mother bear occasionally bent down, letting out soft, soothing sounds as if comforting her cubs. The sight deeply moved me. "She understands that we're helping," I whispered to Parker, who nodded in agreement. "I've never seen an animal trust humans like this," he said. As night fell, we set up an additional wind barrier to shield the area. Despite the wind howling outside, the small shelter was warm and much quieter. Both cubs eventually stabilized. The larger one managed to lift its head and nuzzle against the mother bear's leg. The smaller one remained still but was breathing steadily, and its body was no longer as cold. Watching them, I felt a wave of relief, though exhaustion was creeping in. Parker placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done well, Jamie," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. I nodded, my eyes still on the mother bear. "This is as much as we can do. The rest is up to her." We stayed by the cubs throughout the night. Though tired, no one left their post. The mother bear didn't sleep either, occasionally bending down to gently lick her cub's fur, as if willing them to grow stronger. I felt a profound connection between us and this creature, something that transcended the usual boundary between humans and animals. When dawn broke, the smaller cub opened its eyes and moved slightly. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "We did it," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. The mother bear approached, nuzzling both cubs before turning to look at me. In that moment, her eyes seemed to express gratitude. I smiled, feeling that all the effort through the night had been worth it. But I also knew our journey wasn't over. The mother bear would have to lead her cubs back into the wild, and all we could do was wish them a safer future. As the morning light filtered through the forest, I felt the air soften slightly. The wind had stopped, and an unusual calm settled over everything. The two bear cubs were now moving more freely. The larger cub stood up, wobbling a few steps before leaning against its mother's leg. The smaller cub, though still frail, lifted its head and looked around slowly. It was a moment that made all our efforts worthwhile. The mother bear stood close to her cubs, bending down to sniff them carefully. She let out a soft sound, a sound I had never heard before. It was gentle, almost like a reassurance. I sat quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. Everyone in the team stayed silent, as if we all understood we were witnessing something sacred. Parker walked up beside me, his eyes on the bear family. "Looks like they're ready," he said softly. I nodded, though I felt an emptiness settling in my chest. After everything we had been through, the thought of parting ways brought a tinge of sadness. But I knew this was what was best for them. The mother bear had found her cubs again, and the wild was where they belonged. I took a few steps closer, still maintaining a safe distance. The mother bear lifted her head to look at me, her deep eyes no longer filled with worry. Instead, they held a sense of calm and trust. I stood still, feeling the weight of the moment as our gazes locked. Then, to my surprise, she took a step toward me. My heart skipped a beat. She didn't do anything aggressive. She simply stood there and lowered her head slightly. It wasn't the action of a wild animal, but felt more like a gesture of gratitude. I couldn't help but smile, my eyes stinging with emotion. "No need to thank me, Mama Bear," I whispered, knowing she wouldn't understand. After a few seconds, the mother bear turned back to her cubs. She nudged the smaller one gently, as if encouraging it to move. Both cubs wobbled after her, leaving tiny paw prints in the snow. My team and I stood silently, watching them go. Their silhouettes gradually disappeared into the forest, fading into the quiet wilderness. I let out a long breath, feeling as though I had completed something monumental. Parker patted me on the shoulder. "Well done, Jamie. You accomplished something not everyone would dare to try." I smiled faintly. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And I think the mother bear too. We packed up the site and headed back to the base in silence. No one spoke, but each of us felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I glanced around, seeing Rachel quietly wipe her eyes and Carlos flash a rare smile. Every one of us had experienced something transformative during this journey. A week later, I received a report from Parker. The area near the mining pit had been marked and sealed off to ensure the safety of wildlife. New measures were also implemented to better protect the surrounding environment. It was a small victory, but one with profound significance. Occasionally, as I stood on the observation tower in the early morning, I would think about the mother bear and her cubs. A few times I had glimpsed them from a distance, standing on a hillside and looking toward the base. They never came close again, but I felt an invisible connection between us, a bond that reminded me trust and kindness can transcend any barrier, even between humans and nature. I smiled every time I recalled the look in the mother bear's eyes before she left. It was the greatest lesson of my life. Sometimes courage is not just about doing the right thing, but believing in what others think is impossible.